Door in the Wall tells the tale of Lionel Wallace, a successful English man who is haunted by a green door that has appeared to him at various points in his life. The story is recounted by a narrator named Redmond, a school friend from Lionel's younger days. Lionel reveals to Redmond that beyond the green door is a paradise. Lionel first encountered the door as a boy, having stepped through it to find an enchanted garden populated with tame panthers, a tall girl who kisses him, and other children with whom he plays. But a somber woman arrives in the garden and shows Lionel a book that depicts images of his life. He flips through the book until he sees himself on the street in London and somehow finds himself transported back to the city, returned to his lonely childhood and his stern father. The remainder of the tale of Lionel Wallace follows his obsession with finding and stepping through the green door again, even as he grows to become a successful adult. In all, The Door in the Wall is a lyrical prose ode to the desperate quest that many of us encounter as we age, seeking to recapture, even for a fleeting moment, the wonder of childhood. Hello and welcome again to Roll Off a Tangent. I am here today. My name is Anthony, and as usual, I'm joined by my wonderful co-hosts, Nikki, XJ, and Robert. And I'm really curious to see what all of you thought of The Door in the Wall. So let's launch right into it. Maybe I'll pick on Nikki to dive in and let us know what you thought of this story by H.G. Wells.
Yeah, a great author. The short story itself has a lot of good beats. It's well written, unsurprisingly so. It is H.G. Wells after all. It has a lot of psychological nuances to it. Not the main character, but the protagonist of the story, the man looking for the green door. It's somebody like you can really relate to, the older you get. And yeah, I mean, the metaphor is literally, it's so, how do I say this? Easy to digest and understand exactly what the story is about. I think everybody kind of gets, oh, this is a metaphor for a childhood, a joy of innocence that this man lost and could never have anymore once he grew older. Particular in a situation where I think one of the times where he had an opportunity to go and find the green door was during the time when his father was on his deathbed. To me, that immediately gave it away. I was like, oh, okay. So this is basically him saying, I would love to find the green door right at this moment because then I wouldn't have to be dealing with this. I could go back to my childhood. I could escape the the things that adulthood has made me do, has made me take care of. I'd much rather be somewhere else, doing something much more pleasant, inside a world that doesn't really exist. And of course, it's also the long-running fight that H.G. Wells has in his stories. Science and reasons versus fantasy and pleasure and whimsical adventureness. So yeah, it's a very on theme, on brand story for both H.G. Wells and also this podcast. Makes you very sad, but it's interesting and thoughtful. There you go. Those are my thoughts.
Had you ever... Go ahead.
Yeah.
No, go ahead. Sorry. No, on a personal note.
On a personal note, though, I really hope we get back to pew pews. Like it's been a streak of like, oh, life essence, the meaning of it. Why? I'm done with Hamlet. Can we please get back to Star Wars?
All right, that's a good mandate. I was going to say I was reading this as well, and I'm like, oh, geez, it's definitely seems like we've been on a somber story note, huh? Where
yeah,
things
like
have been
very
a little grim.
thoughtfulness, thought-provoking bullshit. Anyway, please, you had a question.
We need a little escapism. Yeah, but it seems so. Had you ever read any other H.G. Wells stories? Because I hadn't. I've only read.
I read World at War or whatever it's called, War of the World. I'm not sure how it's
called.
In
War of the Worlds, I believe. Is that the
War
one?
Of the World.
Yeah. Martian.
I read that. Yeah, it's the invasion.
Yeah, I read that, but
aliens.
I'd never read
That
any of his
that was a whole
shorter
book.
fiction. Yeah, that was a whole book. Because
Yeah,
this
yeah,
was the
okay.
first short
Oh, I
story.
thought you meant like anything by H.G.
No,
Wells.
no, no. I mean short fiction.
No,
Yeah.
I've never read any of his other short stories. If they are as tragic as this, though, I'm good.
So XJ, what about you? How about you next up?
I feel so embarrassed because you guys are taking such a philosophical approach to the story, and I'm like, I feel like I'm disrespecting the story. I'm probably gonna have an earful from Robert later. Well, I was reading the story, right, and I was like, something's tickling my mind about it, and I was like, halfway, like, I don't know why, but my mind was like sitting somewhere, like trying to recall the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, because they're both about stepping through magical doors, right? And then it struck me midway through, this is an isekai story. This is the
Do you want to
grand-
explain what isekai is to
Yeah,
the viewers
maybe
and Robert?
For the uninitiated, yes, I'm not quite sure what that means.
So I think there are some parallels. So like isekai is like a genre in Japanese manga about some protagonist stepping through into a different into an alternate reality. Most of it is very gamified, and
Okay.
the I think there's a genre, there's a very modern fantasy genre called lit RPG in English.
Yes.
That is
Yeah.
kind of the same. Carl and the Dungeon Crawler, I believe, is one of the more representative titles.
What
Which
was the name of that horrible guy who goes into a fantasy world? It's like a couple of books, something Covenant,
Thomas
Thomas
Covenant.
or something
The
like that. Anyway,
Unbeliever. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, well, I mean that is also a stepping through a magical door story, isn't it?
yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. So isekai is basically those types of stories. Only
Yeah.
most protagonists are way less terrible than the guy I just.
I mean, they are
Yeah.
terrible in a different way. They're completely flat.
That's
They are like an insert for the reader to put their shoes into. They're kind of like Harry Potter, where you are like it's a container for fantasy realization, and then a lot of the stuff are like gamified. You have game menus that tells you about your skills and your stats, and it's really it's like McDonald's, like nice for a bite, but I feel a little bit embarrassed that I made the connection.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, I mean, it's part of that whole genre of going to a magical place from the mundane world, right? So,
Yeah, I mean, because of that, like a lot of the somberness of the story kind of got blunted for me when I was reading through it, because I could totally see some of the stuff like there's a lot of like, I think Wallace, when he was reminiscing about the doors, what I hear a lot, what is coming up a lot for me, is this guy is talking about lost opportunities, like because just about every time the door came up, appeared in his life, he was weighing between like being super busy and going to work, and I'm thinking to myself, man, that sounds a lot like a dad that has no time for his children. You know what I mean? Like those it's like a very common trope in Asian literature, actually, about the dad that just who's so career focused, so focused on working. He works 12, 13, 14 hours a day and never had time for his children. That kind of stuff. Didn't go to their first school play or their university graduation, and then just kind of lost out on connecting with the kids and that kind of stuff. That's what immediately came up for me. Of course, the thing is, the door is painted with a rather sinister brush, if I have to say. So that kind of throws everything into like this weird light, where we're not too sure, like the readers, us as the readers, are not too sure if the door is benign, or is it some kind of malevolent entity, or is it like a bit like the island of the lotus eaters, if we were to call it that, where you just kind of go in and then you partake of the lotus and then you never come out, that sort of stuff. And of course the thing is, we find towards the end of the story, spoilers, I suppose, spoiler tag if you don't want to find out, that our protagonist died in front of what our narrator thinks is a door. Now, is it actually the green door? We don't know. But yeah, so there is a rather sinister air about the whole experience. Even though the protagonist tells us it's such a wonderful thing, and the way it's described just about sounds kind of dodgy to me too. So this is about the point where this is literally the part where just some chick just comes up and kisses him. That point was the point where I was like, wow, this is an isekai story.
Yeah, I mean, now that I'm hearing all of what you have to say about it, XJ, I wish I had the same mentality. Maybe I would enjoy the story a lot more if I could laugh about it.
Yeah, so seriously, I mean, I guess Spirited Away, I guess, is an example, right, of isekai, right? I mean, Spirited Away is one of those.
Oh, no, you're talking about the Ghibli film?
Yes. Isn't that sort of the scenario where someone's swept away into a magical world? I've seen only like synopses of these.
I'm not sure.
I'm not a huge anime fan. Okay.
I'm not sure if I would categorize Spirited Away as an isekai.
Isekai is a very particular part of the genre. It also kind of implies low quality. I'm not sure if that's really the case, but at least every time I've seen someone be like, "Oh, it's isekai," and I looked at that piece of work, it usually was low quality.
So it's kind of empty wish fulfillment.
Yeah. Well, which is why I say it's like McDonald's, right?
Okay.
It's like
Okay.
no nutrient food.
Do we want to check in with what's up? Do we want to check in with
I'm trying to think of I'm thinking of something something that would be a Western equivalent of isekai genre. Not by it's literally about the same thing where you go to a parallel world, but I mean, I guess it's like power fantasy, okay? Like power. Yeah. Every time that you talk about power fantasy, there's an implied idea that what's it called? The quality is not going to be as good as if it was like I don't know, as I said, like Romeo and Juliet or Hamlet or whatever, right? Like you're buying something that's gonna fill you up and you're gonna feel good about it, but it's you're not expecting it to be written really well and there to be like really good storylines or characters, and you're like pleasantly surprised if anything like that happens. That's sort of like the isekai genre, where you're expecting it to be pretty bad, and you're only there to just be like, oh, okay, this world is cool. Oh, wow, so this is how they level. Like, you're expecting it not to. You're expecting it to be full of tropes, right? So, like XJ said, like, oh, a random girl comes up and kisses you. In isekai, the main protagonist, because he's supposed to represent you, every female person that exists in this world, in an isekai genre, they're all interested in him, obviously. Because, I mean, he's the main character, aka you. And, of course, if you were in a fantasy world, of course, everybody would love you, right? Right, so it's like a very wish fulfillment sort of a genre.
Interesting.
Oh, am I muted? Yes, quite literally that. Yes.
But enough about horrible isekais. What about you, Robert? What did you think of
the door in the wall? Let's hear from our resident.
I was gonna say the isekai in the wall. Yeah,
boy.
go on, Robert.
Well, from all of that to our resident Englishman,
Yeah.
Robert,
Yeah.
take it away. What's your thoughts on the story?
It's quite a useful corrective to the usual image one has of H.G. Wells, or at least a lot of people do, of somebody who's ultra interested in social and political reform and modernization, and everybody in the future living in shape of things to come type antiseptic cities. Uh, this is something very different, and it's yeah, wish fulfillment in a way, but also uh, I think he chose the more courageous or ambitious way of writing this kind of story. The other way, which is also very good, is exemplified by the episode of The Twilight Zone, which deals with exactly the same theme and has the same sort of ending, called A Stop at Willoughby. Only in the Twilight Zone case, the character is a failure from start to finish. He's put upon, he's henpecked by his wife, he's browbeaten by his boss, uh, and he just wants to get away from it all. And he does get away from it all because the train he's on stops at an unexpected place, which is not on the map, and he finds it wonderful and peaceful. And at the end of the episode, spoiler alert, he sees it again and eagerly jumps out. And of course, in terms of our reality, he simply jumped off the train and was killed. Now,
Mm.
H.G. Wells, that's a very good episode, but H.G. Wells does it a bit more ambitiously, and he has his protagonist, uh, Lionel Wallace, as a very successful man in worldly terms. So what Wallace is trying to get away from is not failure, but the wrong kind of success. And that adds a very telling touch to the story, because Wells himself was a very successful man. And you think, well, could it be that he looks back on his, well, I don't know when he wrote this story actually, so it could have been a young man's story, but perhaps he already sensed he was on the way up, but maybe he could have sensed that he was missing something. I don't know, but anyway, it's an impressive story, and it is about recapturing childhood innocence in a way. It's also more generally a suggestion that, as one of you guys said, it's about lost opportunities. So the moral is, if you see an opportunity like that, no matter what the circumstances, grab it, because it might not recur. Although in this story it did recur.
I just got a really dark thought after listening to your explanation. Could it be that this story, the green door, represents suicide?
Yeah.
Because it's like, so he was basically on the verge of, he was very unhappy as a kid, and then he was on a verge, and then you saw this sort of like, he had this feeling that he could get away from it, and then somehow he was saved from that fate. And then every time something very arduous, something that he didn't want to deal with, like a huge discussion with partners, or his father being on the deathbed, he sort of gambled with the idea again of this door, aka suicide, and didn't take it then. And then finally he sort of cracked, and this whole construction thing is him committing suicide, basically.
Hmm.
Yeah, I
For
mean,
Yeah.
the story, like I said, the green door, it was painted with a rather sinister light throughout the whole thing. So yeah, I don't know if it could be constructed as like a very happy door to step through, so to speak. Just
Yeah.
because of some of the. I have to say, it's done really well. There's nothing directly sinister about the door, since it's like described in such glowing terms. by the protagonist, but there is just like something off about it. I suppose in a way it was started off by the narrator. Yeah.
That's an interesting perspective. I didn't quite see. I didn't see it that way, but I guess again, good stories are always they always open up things to multiple interpretations. So that's a hallmark of a great tale. Is this how people can get different things from it? So yeah, I mean, to me, it was the real world was sinister, but it was this. But is there something sinister about this just random offering of escape and escapism, maybe to a point. But I mean, spoiler alert again. I mean, it does at the end of the story, it does open up the question of did he commit suicide purposely, or was he so swept up in imagination that they found him at the bottom of a pit of a construction site, having walked through a door, and the narrator is surmising or speculating whether he really actually couldn't tell reality from fantasy anymore, or if he thought, or if this door was actually ever real, if it ever could have been, or so did he finally made the decision, Lionel did, to step through the door after it had reappeared to him after his childhood entrance into it that one time. It reappeared to him over his life, like you were saying, during important moments of his life, or there's an old saying that comes to mind. Yeah, there's this old story a saying that comes to mind, like, be careful that you don't succeed at the wrong thing. Or so maybe he was successful by the measure of civilization that he grew up in, but to him he was a failure, or he had succeeded at the wrong things. He wasn't happy in his success in the real world. So it was this, he finally gave in and said, I'm not going, because every time he was going to step through the store, something distracted him, a death of a parent, or a big event in his life as a politician. He's a rising politician. He's 39 years old, I think they said in the story, almost 40. And he finally said, I'm not going to compromise anymore. I'm just going to take a step through the store. But it led him to his downfall, literally. So, yes, this is a trope that's been done. By the way, I checked the date on the story. It was 1906 it was first published. So almost.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was probably when Wells was about that age, right? So,
yeah.
A little self-report there, as the kids say these days, right? But about 50 years or so before The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. So this trope, I wonder how far back this trope of, stepping in, I think it's ancient, stepping in, well, it is ancient, and stepping into another world, being transported by fairies or some other beings into a parallel world. This escapism has always been with us, right? So, but this was such a... Go ahead. What's that, Robert?
Sorry, I was, from what you were saying about The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, there's another similarity, a fairly minor one, in that, like Lucy tries to convince Edmund that the wardrobe does what she said it does, and she tries to show him, and it doesn't do it.
Right.
So in this story, he tries to show his schoolmates the door in the wall, and it doesn't exist when he tries to show. So yeah, same theme.
Yeah, it's this, is it a fantasy? It seems like it is most likely a fever dream of his, or an obsession of his, or a manifestation of his own dissatisfaction with his own life and circumstances, no matter how successful he gets. So I think it was, again, I called it lyrical. It really seemed like a prose poem. It was bittersweet. It made me sad reading it. It was just very beautifully written. And I felt really sorry for this guy, and it made me feel very self-reflective. On my own. I mean, I'm 49, about to turn 50 this year, so it's like I'm not 39, I'm 49. But it's you're at these points in life when you're reflecting on your life. You're like, what opportunities should I be taking, rather than just being carried along by the circumstances of my life and just kind of going on autopilot. There's these times in our lives when we step back and consider that.
The sense that I get about Wallace as a character is that the guy was basically living up to the expectations of the people around him, and not really not really living life for himself. So that could be another metaphor, I suppose, for like well, a question I suppose posed by the story that we should ask ourselves from time to time. Like
Yeah. And it's interesting though that you kind of saw it, XJ, from this more sort of McDonald's way of seeing things. You know,
No,
this genre
the
again. No, I'm saying no. It's totally relevant because again, based in time, this any trope can become sort of a cliche almost. You know, or if not cliche, sort of so used that it's a framing device. It becomes this something that maybe for him was sort of a restatement of ancient, you know, being swept away by things. You know, speaking of swept away, but and again, I'm not dissing your approach to it. It is sort of an overused trope now in our time and place. And like you were saying, like Nikki brought up lit RPG, you know, where people are like you become this protagonist, and then you're a Gary Stu, you know, in the female versions of Mary Sue, right? Everybody loves you, all the opposite, you know, genders that you're attracted to, or they think you're the best and you're great at everything, and you know you have minor troubles and things that come up that challenge you a little bit, but there was never any doubt that you're going to overcome, right? So it's yeah. So
I'm
in those ways,
sorry.
those are very the McDonald's version of
I
this
should
trope.
just I should just report that my camera seems to have frozen, but I can't
Oh yeah.
hop in and out of chat because I'm also recording. So my apologies to our listeners. You just have to put up with a frozen face on my part.
C'est la vie.
Okay,
Well,
back to the regular podcast.
I'm sure there's people that come for our golden voices, as it were. Anyway, so
Yeah, that's right.
but anyway, yeah. So that's sort of. I mean, any other thoughts that are popping up? Because yeah, this is definitely some things that you brought up that I hadn't considered about. You know, as this genre of this type of trope has aged over time and how it's changed in terms of
Honestly,
how we view it.
honestly, like the point where it connected in my head with isekai was literally the point where the girl kissed Wallace when he was a kid. That was the point.
Okay.
Before that, it was like I was like, oh, okay, interesting. Bit like Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And I was kind of expecting a story along those lines, and then until everything became like this, such a golden paradise when he stepped through, and everyone is dancing around him, you know, where he is very obviously the main character in that world. That was a point where it became like isekai to me. But you know, there's also a very strong sense of, I think, like Nikki pointed out, could just be a metaphor for taking his own life. And you know, when you are doing that, I suppose, of course, you're going to be the center of your own fantasy world if that's the case.
Yeah, it could also be the trap of nostalgia, you know, a warning, a cautionary tale of the trap of going back and being obsessed with nostalgia and idealizing your youth and having it stymie your life and take the joy out of your life today, you know, and it's nostalgia is good in small doses and, you know, tapping into that just can flavor modern life, but if you just like any other seasoning, if you over season something, you know, if you over season your current day with nostalgia, you get lost in it, you know, and you may fall through your own green door, whether it's, you know, self deletion or just living as a ghost in your own modern day because your mind is always casting back into the past. So, yeah.
I've thought of something, another connection following on, Anthony, from what you're saying, that talking of being lost, I think Wells as a writer got lost sometime.
Sorry.
Uh,
Oops.
in which this story came out, because his last wonderful science fiction novel, The First Men in the Moon, came out in 1901. And after that, as far as novels, science fiction novels were concerned, his achievement just plummeted. If you compare The First Man on the Moon with The Food of the Gods, which came out just 3 years later, the latter is really terrible. It's one of the most boring books I've ever read. What happened to the chap? What did he think he was playing at? It's a mystery, but he took a wrong turning in the literary in sense in a big way.
Found a
Perhaps
green
too
door and
much
walked through it.
politics. I don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting.
By the way, if hold on, if XJ, are you actually here or did you disappear?
I'm still here. My camera
Okay,
just
so yeah, so the
decided.
recording is still going on.
Yes, my camera just decided to step through the green door.
Okay. Along with XJ Wells. Fair enough.
Uh,
Is there any more action-packed story that H.G. Wells wrote that you know of, Robert? Or are they all boring?
There are a lot of atmos. They're not all boring.
I'm just joking.
They're a lot.
I mean, I had read, obviously the War of the Worlds, and I had read, the Time Machine, and that was it. I mean, I'd never really thought of him as a short story writer, strangely enough. And then I'm like, I came across the story as I was.
I read his autobiography, and it was very boring. Mr. I believe it was maybe I'm having a fever dream. I believe it was called Mr. Polly or something like that. He wrote
the history of.
Yeah. I read that and it was so boring.
Because his
It's not
life was
boring.
boring, or because it was the way it was written was boring.
I wouldn't say it's just not. Well, it's not science fiction at all. It's not.
Maybe it was because I was looking for a science fiction book. I thought it was a science fiction book, and then I read it and I was like, oh my god, this is so boring.
Yeah. I mean, that's about my experience with this story. Like, if I was honest to the experience reading it at the time, I'd at the end of this podcast, I'd probably give it like a 2 out of 10. But that's being very unfair to the story. It's more like I was like, oh, let's go. There's gonna be some crazy world, and there's gonna be fights, and there's gonna be lore and something exciting. And it's just like an old fucking, what is it called, like guy having an important job somewhere, and he like hates it. He hates that he has a lot of money. I was like, oh yeah, cry me in a limousine, dude. Whatever.
Oh, hey, see, maybe you're just not at that point in life when you're starting
Yeah, I
to
really
wonder.
hope. Yeah, listen. I really
Unlike
want to
old
become
guys
this
like
kind
me.
of. I need to become this guy because it means like I'm really rich and I'm sad about it. That's all I want.
Right, like, Elon Musk obviously is, right?
I don't think that guy is very sad though. I think he's very
Well,
happy where he's at.
sad clown. Anyway,
Oh,
all
okay.
that aside, current day aside, but who knows? But maybe it's just also, yeah. I see you guys are younger than me, so you took this in a more like, come on, let's go. I mean, no, honestly though, I was hoping for a little more of this world and maybe a little more adventure too. When I was like, okay, let's see if he gets back through, and what happens when he gets back through as an adult, And I'm like, oh, and so I can see like, kind of was there too. But then I'm like, oh, then I just kind of let the story help me wallow in my own self doubts of like,
Yeah,
what have
yeah.
I done? What have I done with my life? Where's my green door so I can walk through mine? But hopefully there's not a construction site on the other side where I fall to my death.
Yeah, I don't know. By the way, I don't know what the hell the moral of the story is. Like the thing tries to make it so like uh, like the entire time it's building up to the green door was the right decision. He had to somehow like move away from his reality because it was just choking him. So I thought like, oh, the moral of the story is like sometimes you just have to live in a fantasy world and let go, right? So that you're not like overwhelmed. But then the end of the story is the one time he does it, he dies. So I'm like,
Well,
okay. So
I think,
maybe don't.
yeah. Well, it's a metaphor of like the dangers of nostalgia, right? The toxic nostalgia. Don't fall for it. Don't go back. Only go forward and make your life better now, rather than
But he was
going
so
back in time.
miserable.
I don't know. You could draw the opposite conclusion and say the point of the story is that death isn't that bad.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, that way lies madness, right? And death.
Well, no,
Yeah, I
I
mean,
think I get what Robert is going for. He means to say that the bliss that the man experienced by letting go, gave meaning to all the previous suffering. Right? Is that where you're going with that?
Well, not only that, but also he may have been happy afterwards.
if there is an afterwards,
If there isn't afterwards, yeah. Well, I mean,
you
who
know, that
knows?
depends on-
No,
Yeah.
no one knows where Wallace is right now, or at least in
Yeah.
the story, so to speak. You
Or
know?
listen, I mean, if you take it from sort of a Barsoom story thing, the body seems dead here on Earth, but your consciousness gets transferred. So maybe his consciousness got transferred
Yeah.
to some other realm and has just left his dead body behind. You know, maybe it's a fantastical place like Mars. You know, but who knows?
I mean, that could be. I would say in this situation, even if there is an afterlife in this universe. No, I'm not talking about our universe. You know, if you believe in God, you believe in God, so then there is heaven, right? But if we are saying that is the carbon copy of the world, a Christian world exists in the story, the guy wouldn't go to heaven, Robert. He'd go to hell because he committed suicide. So I don't know if this
Okay.
is a happy ending for him.
Well,
Yeah, I
depending
see
on
what
the
you-
rules of your afterlife, yeah. Christians generally believe there's no reward for self-deletion, right?
No, but
Self-deletion.
the story doesn't say he deliberately killed himself.
No, but come on, it's implied very harsh.
I
Well,
don't think.
You don't think so?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if I agree either on that, but
I think
I
the
think he just
story
became so.
implies, the story
Go ahead.
implies he saw this green door, and this time he was determined not to let the opportunity slip. So he rushed through, and he got more than he bargained for.
Right, way more. So it was out of desperation and just, you know, he was not gonna, and just desperation and just sadness, overwhelming sadness that he had given up these opportunities before, right? So no more regrets. Gonna go through that door.
I mean, it's also
Okay,
really
guys.
like I mean, like I said, it's got the whole thing's like the green door's got a rather sinister
Exactly.
bent to it because
Sinister undertone.
you know that like the whole throughout the entire time, only he could see the door. No one else saw it. You know, it could basically be a figment of his imagination. You know, and I'm sure we've
Brought on
had
by depression.
Yeah,
Brought on by extreme depression.
yeah, and you know, I'm sure we have had situations when we were kids where something seems so real to us. Yeah.
I don't know if he was ever a happy person. So
No,
he just was
clearly
so-
not. Clearly
Yeah,
not.
so that's a shame. So was it his own? I guess the door does take on a malevolence there in some way. It's interesting because I had not seen the door with malevolence as being malevolent. So Robert, and you either?
I agree. I go by the mood of the story, and the mood is one of regret, but there's nothing evil about the door.
Interesting difference in perspective.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I had not considered that, but
I think
again,
H.G.
great.
H.G. Wells' short stories. The more I think of it, the more I think that mood is his thing. Like you could think of The Red Room, for example, which is a story about fear. It starts out by being a ghost story, but there aren't any ghosts actually. It's just a story about pure fear. And In the Abyss, is a tale about finding an undersea civilization, and that has a bad ending. But it's just a mood piece, really. I think that was it. But then again, short stories, that's what they're best at, isn't it? You can't have a huge action adventure squeezed inside a short story. It just doesn't work. You can perhaps do it in a novella, but you need about 40 or 50 pages to get
I don't know. Lots of Conan stories were very action packed.
That's true. That's true,
Yeah.
but they could easily have been totally boring, the Conan stories. It's just that the author happens to be so darn good that he can make even fighting, he can make it seem interesting to read. You know.
He
Yeah.
keeps the tension. Is
Hmm.
what you're starting to say.
Yeah,
I
that-
mean, writing action-packed stories, you also have to have some sort of an underbelly there, a reason for why that person is doing whatever is happening.
yeah.
And the reason doesn't have to be all that philosophical or like so grand that I don't know, you're deciding a kingdom's fate in the short story or something, but it has to have some sort of stakes. That's how you make action exciting. But also you have to write it well, which Robert E. Howard does well, fantastically, in my opinion.
You just have the knack of doing it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, all I have to say is though, whatever the conclusion of this story is, I wouldn't read this to children. I think they would misunderstand it.
Yeah. You might get them all going to building sites and rushing through doors and
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's just like I feel like the moral of the story is so gray and convoluted that I don't think there is one singular answer, which is good, right? It brings discussion to the situation. But from the other point of view, I feel like the more I listen to all of you, the more I can see all of the interpretations being somewhat true. Um, and that's great. That's great to see. Uh, but I guess I want something a bit more definitive for myself, and I can't really make a heads or tails about the ending of the story and what it's really trying to say for me. Right? I'm not saying that somebody couldn't propose some sort of an idea that I could agree with, but just from a personal position, I find it kind of well, not maybe lackluster. I'm not sure what to say or how to say it exactly, but I feel like maybe there is some sort of a fault of the author buried in there.
well, I don't suppose he knew any more than you do the
That's true.
definitive answer, because authors don't work like that. They're sort of
No, that's right.
they're channels through which something pours out. And
Yeah, you're. Hmm.
if they knew if they knew more about what they were doing, they would do more of the good stuff. I was saying about H.G. Wells, he really declined in the second half of his life, and he wouldn't have done that if he'd really understood his own good points.
That's true.
Maybe he just got tired of the whole writing business. Who knows?
Maybe. Maybe he already thought he had achieved his
I
magnum
mean,
opus.
if
or
if
something.
this story is a reflection of where he is at in that particular point of his life, then I could totally see him like just like losing interest in writing, and that it just shows in his writing, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, he seems just very confused to me. Like, you see somebody who's shopping at Walmart or Tesco or whatever the hell they have in Canada, um, and they're just at aisle 6 and they're looking at one sugar and they're reading it and then they're looking at another sugar and they kind of look the same and they just don't know what to pick.
Yeah.
Very,
Well, I
very
mean, my
monotone.
take is he probably just lost interest, kind of like
Yeah.
George R. Martin lost interest.
Yeah.
I
He
mean,
keeps claiming that he's writing something.
I mean, like, what didn't he? Wasn't he just like talking about live action show to Elden Ring or something like that? Which means
Really?
I don't know, another TV show he's involved in, which means that mythical book of his is pushed even further back now.
Oh yeah, forget it. If he's like talking about something that is not even Game of Thrones related, he has fully moved on.
Yeah.
It's
Well, hey,
over.
I hear Brandon Sanderson's available to finish another fantasy series when when the
Oh
author
my god,
dies,
that that guy, that guy should be called the finisher at this point. Oh my god,
right?
that's crazy.
He is. Well, interesting. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I think this story is leading some of us down like a nihilistic interpretation here, a nihilistic
Yeah, and
feelings
I
about.
don't like it. Get me more pew-pews. Get me more people killing snakes. I don't know,
I agree. I
giant
think we're
snakes.
done with. Yeah, I agree. I think we need a little pew pew, a little adventure and sword and sorcery or something, or fantasy or science fiction, anything. So we no more of these maudlin stories that lead us into nihilistic considerations.
Stop making me think.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so then do we want to get into scores? Unless someone else has something, another
No,
thought
no.
that they want to get
I
into.
think sounds like a pretty natural end to the discussion.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's see. Let's go reverse order from everyone. So how about Robert? You start with your score, and then we'll go Robert, XJ, Nikki, and me. We'll do it that way.
I'll give it 8 out of 10. It's very
Whoa, so it was terrible.
No, it's a very memorable story. Yep, very memorable. I've read it twice now. Once when I was a lad, and then the next time for the podcast. So it's not one of my regular favourites, but I'd give it 8 out of 10.
Yeah, I mean, Robert, I'm sorry, but you give almost everything 10 out of 10. So 8 out of... You're like IGN. You're like IGN. If you give anything below 10, it's like... It's horrible. It's completely utter rubbish. And you can't convince me otherwise.
XJ?
Yeah, I see what you mean. I see what you mean.
I
Number 8 occurred to me.
Yeah,
But
didn't occur
it's
to
all
me.
the 8s, you know, so I have to give it 8 out of 10.
Okay.
I'm gonna give it a 7.5. It's not typically a story that I enjoy, but it did raise a lot of discussion. Like I wasn't expecting such a huge we did have a very rather interesting discussion over the whole story, and I wasn't expecting that from this short story, I have to say.
So this discussion elevated the short story for you.
Yeah, I mean, like for sure, because I think like the discussion ended up being quite enjoyable for me anyway. So good kudos to a story that can enable an interesting discussion after the fact, you know.
Yeah.
So 7.5 for me. Over to you guys, because you can't see my face.
I'll give it a 7. I think the idea itself is very interesting. I like where the story was going in many ways. The 3 things that I take the points off for is, I do feel like the message is so muddy where it stops being like, oh, the author is trying to place you in a situation where it could be anything and you should have a discussion with it, to the story is kind of contradicting itself. So what is really going on here? And then also, the other thing is, whatever happened to the character in the story, I'm always a person who is for solving situations in real life without, committing horrible acts to oneself, like suicide. So for that alone, I also have to take off a point, because whatever Robert can say that death isn't so bad, maybe I agree, but it's not your choice to take your life. You shouldn't do that. It is a cardinal sin, in my opinion. There you go. So it's a 7.
Interesting. All right, so not a 2. Like you said, it's not. You mentioned if it was in a different context, maybe it would have been a 2 for you. But in context of our conversation and our
Yeah,
It's a
it's
7.
a 7. I mean, it's a 2 because I want a giant man with huge muscles, so huge that he can only gain them through steroids. Grab a head of a monster and rip it out of the neck socket. There you go. That's what I want.
Magical
Okay.
fantasy steroids.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes. Is that the name of the next short story we're doing? I really hope so.
Magical steroids. One of us should write that story.
Oh yeah,
right.
let's go.
Well,
What about
I
you?
think me? Well, let's
Yeah.
see. Maybe this was either the right story for me to read at this time or the really wrong story. I don't know. It's again, maybe it's just again reading stories at different times of life. For me, this was like a kind of a cautionary tale. Maybe for me, then maybe that's the message I took from it because it's like get off your butt and start doing the things that you want to do and stop regretting things and stop flirting with regret and move forward. Don't look back to the past and regret things. Don't go through that green door. Don't try to escape from the life that you've created because there's good things about my life and there's things that I regret. So I think that's everybody, right? So but don't become so obsessed with your regrets that you walk through your own green door. So for me, I think this was a little bit of a wake-up call, a cautionary tale for me, like to not go through my own green doors. So it's 9 out of 10 for me. I think I was struck by the beauty and of the sadness of it. It was a very bittersweet experience for me reading it, and I was really rooting for him to kind of find that find something wonderful and not death behind the green door, and hoping that it was real. But it's I don't know. Maybe it's don't go through the green door and make your own. Don't go falling for a fantasy. Literally, move forward into the future with purpose and not regret. So, yeah. So it was very impactful for me personally. So I'm glad I kind of stumbled upon it, recently and recommended it for us to read it. So, but yeah.
Uh-huh.
Thanks for all your perspectives, gents, as usual. So it's very enlightening. And I hope our listeners found it enlightening as well. So if you like our show, Roll Off a Tangent, you can like, share, subscribe, please, and please give us your thoughts and feelings and comments. We'd love to hear from anyone listening. So with that, gentlemen, any final words before we depart again?
No, not from me. Wonderful wrap up, I should say.
There's the final words of the story, but did he see it like that? So,
Oh.
Right. Yes. Did he see it like that? Hopefully, the audience sees this as entertaining, and you see it like that, just as entertaining as we thought it was, right? So,
Yeah.
with that, I'm gonna say, I guess, gents, it's time to say goodbye. So, until we see you all again.
Until next time.
Until next time.
Bye bye.
Goodbye.
Bye bye.
Be well. Don't go through the green door.